Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dialogue, Harnham's LinkedIn Live series. I'm really pleased to announce that today we are launching the European Salary Guide, which is just a couple of hours fresh off the press. I am joined by the leaders in our different European markets to discuss the trends and the insights that come from our most recent salary guide and a little bit about the state of the European recruitment market. Before I let them introduce themselves, I do just want to say that the link to the guide, both the European guide and the UK guide, which we launched earlier this week, is available in this post. And we're also live. So we really welcome any questions that you have. We'll try and get to them throughout the live session and hopefully answer as many of them as we can. So without further ado, I would love to let these guys introduce themselves. So Wes, kicking off with you.
Hi, everyone. So I've been at Harnham for the last 5 years, looking after the growth of Harnham in France. We are now a team of 7 recruiters tackling every data and analytics markets. Yeah, that's basically the gist of it. I think maybe we can move on to Peter.
Sure. Thank you, Wes. Hi, my name is Peter. I'm happy to be here. I am in Berlin and I build up the Germany market for Harnham. I personally focus on data science and BI, but we also cover all the specialties here. And we have a team of 5 right now. We have 3 people starting in August.
Hi guys, my name is Elise. I've been working for Harnham for about 2 years now, and I am responsible for the data engineering and data science recruitment in the Nordics.
Last but not least, I'm Ewan. I've been at Harnham for around 5.5 years now. Originally started in the risk analytics team in the UK, leading that side, and then towards the end of last year, moved over to manage consultants across the Nordics, Spain and the Netherlands. So I think we're a team of 9 at the minute, and likewise attacking every vertical that Harnham has.
Great. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the salary guide, we have actually released it now for 9 years. It's in its 9th year, and it is an independent survey that's really aimed to design and inform those both that hire into data analytics, but also those that are within the data analytics profession themselves. So it has an overview of salaries, the latest hiring trends, workplace trends, tech trends, and essentially we also provide commentary as well, both internal and external market commentary. This year was a really big year for the survey. So we had 3,265 participants, and we combined that with analysis from Harnham's hiring data and also job board and market kind of trends as well. And it was all done by an independent analyst who produced the data through a kind of a median rather than the extra high or the low salaries. So we're really hoping that you'll find the insights and the trends from this year's survey particularly interested. And we are really just going to kind of talk through some of the data and some of the trends in this session. And hopefully, if you download the guide today, you'll be able to kind of fill in the rest yourself. So obviously, there's a bit of an elephant in the room in that this survey has come out just after the kind of COVID-19 situation. So just to talk people through, the salary was actually the combined of 6 weeks prior to COVID and 6 weeks post-COVID. So the survey does include data from both sides of the kind of pandemic, which we found quite interesting to see what the differences were. So question number 1 for you guys, which is, what are you seeing as some of the findings about how COVID-19 has affected your market, or what have you seen?
Maybe I'll jump in first on that one. I think the interesting thing about the whole situation of COVID and what candidates really look after in their jobs and everything that candidates saying they want a more competitive salary. So it was more centered around money, which makes sense. The logic reason. Post-COVID or during COVID, one of the main reason or the main factor that candidates look after is more career progression, stability, and all that comes with safety at work, really. As we know, a lot of people have had a bit tougher situations, losing their jobs or not feeling as safe, really. So we've shifted from thinking about money first to thinking about, am I stable? Can I see myself being in that company after COVID? And am I going to keep my job, really? So that's what I've seen really in France. And I think the stats back that up as well.
Cool. What about you, Peter, in Germany?
Yeah, I think I can confirm that in Germany, we have an interesting situation because Berlin is one place and the rest of the country is another place in terms of the companies, the maturity of the market. I think is very different, but I can just confirm what Wes said. We also see that from the numbers that people may have switched or moved for the salary before. And now, in some cases, unfortunately, they were also the first ones to be let go, or super fancy AI and ML sort of machine learning initiatives that were heavily invested in without really having a business model are now being axed, and they realize, okay, we actually need to look at something like Wes mentioned, career progression, but also general perspective and stability in what they do in their work as data professionals. And that's something we definitely see across the board in the market. And also, I think after this initial shock, we actually see sort of a return to what some people now call the new normal. We actually already saw before in terms of remote working, in terms of virtual processes, very digital sort of fluid processes and agile teams. And this, to me, at least in Germany, seems to be going back to that, and companies do focus and start hiring again. So that's what I can say from that side.
Yeah, I think I can mirror a lot of what Peter said. Initially, we did see in the Nordics, obviously, an impact on the market in terms of live jobs. Businesses were, in general, more hesitant to hire, which was probably a direct result of employees being furloughed. However, in the Nordics, we saw a pretty quick adaptation in terms of companies digitalizing their interview processes and really facilitating for digital onboarding as well. And so what we see now is that companies are very much still hiring, particularly those business critical roles within data and analytics. I don't know how that is within your market, Ewan.
Yeah, well, I think there's no doubt that obviously hiring has reduced and less candidates are moving. I think people actually feel more secure in their roles at the moment because they're probably getting more communication than ever from senior leadership and management who don't want people to freak out, move on at a rash decision, and make sure they feel good at where they're working. But there is a correlation that more people probably feel a little bit more unhappy in their role at the moment because it's obviously a changing environment. Relationships are very different. Management styles will change for different reasons. So it'll be interesting to see once it starts to relax and starts to go back to normal. It looks like there probably will be a lot of movement and a lot of people will be looking for new jobs. So all those roles coming back onto the market, hopefully things should pick up relatively quickly into a normal cycle of, in terms of attrition and hiring as well, that, companies aren't struggling for that talent gap because there is people out there that want to look, just maybe now is just not the right time.
I would probably, excuse me.
Yeah,
would probably add one last thing, and I think we're probably going to jump into it a bit more, specifically a bit later, but positive effects to me, at least in the French market that I see from COVID is all the options to work remotely, and not only during this time, but potentially in the future. That traditionally France is such, I guess, a late bloomer for all the remote or flexible working options. I see this as such a great opportunity for companies to realize, it can work if we empower people, employees, and trust them to do that job. Of course, we're going to see if it works. And this period has kind of been used as a trial to see, can remote work? And I think it's a big yes. I'm hoping that post-COVID, when people are allowed to go back to work freely, companies will give more remote options, flexible options, because I think that's the main thing that was we're behind in France, at least compared to all you guys' other markets.
I think it'll be interesting as well to see companies how they do embrace it after, because I think if they don't and they want to go back to what it was before, they could see a lot of people moving on, because if every other company's doing it and this company refuses to, people will move. And it's obviously, like I said, we'll go into it a bit later, but flexible working is a massive reason for why people have moved jobs in the last 12 months. So now with this that's happened, it's probably more important than ever in terms of keeping your staff.
Yeah. And I think it does actually lead nicely into, some of the data that we saw is, I think one of the kind of things that we noticed more generally in data and analytics was actually maybe the kind of new normal was already established in the data and analytics industry on the most part. Actually prior to the COVID situation, quite a significant amount of people already had flexible working and things like that. So, I think it's become a real spotlight now is everybody had to be remote. But what do you think about, I guess the trend post COVID and what you've actually seen generally over the last year?
In terms of flexible working, so
yeah, about, I guess, the what was already available and what you're starting to see now. I guess you've touched on it a little bit there.
Yeah, I think for like in particular Spain, if you look at the stats there, they've actually got the lowest in Europe when it comes to flexible working. I think it's 76%, and a lot of other countries are around 80 to 90. And it was actually the most important reason, or most important benefit, that people find in their package. So there'll definitely be a correlation to that and why people have moved on. I can see that definitely going up. I mean, obviously it's probably at around, well, hopefully at 99, 100% at the minute, if they're following the right rules and regulations. But I can definitely think that will go up. And then I can also see that that's now going to be less of a reason why people are going to want to move on, which will benefit, companies in Spain quite significantly. Similar, I think, obviously Wes can go into France a bit more detail because it's similar to Amsterdam, but yours is relatively low as well. I think you would agree.
Yeah. So when looking at the stats that we gathered, the top 5 most important benefits to employees working from home in France is second one to only bonuses. So money, and the stats were collected as well pre-COVID, but money is the number one, and second, working from home. When you include the stats from Amsterdam and Belgium, you have health insurance that comes in as well. But in France, it's not really a topic because it's mandatory, government provided and everything. So yeah, working from home is definitely such a big sought after benefit. We were traditionally not great at having it in France. Now we work with a lot of startups that I think are putting this in part of their business now as a usual thing. It's not just going to be a COVID benefit. It's going to carry on after that. So I think it's just a benefit for everyone. If that works, it's great for companies and employees alike, really. I don't know how it is in Germany. You mentioned, I think Berlin is quite an international city, attracting a lot of people. I would assume it's probably as well a big benefit.
It is, but ironically, they actually struggled more than the bigger, more traditional companies. So I can even see the difference in the city here. So if you have, large like blue chip companies that have, subsidiaries here, they immediately sent everyone home. They gave everyone, got a package sent home with a notebook, and everything was ready to go. And the innovative, agile, small, startups and grown-ups and high growth companies, they were the ones that said, no, you guys need to come in. We can't do this if you're not on site. And they all sort of got aligned now, and now mostly people just are looking to a flexible way to go back. And I think that's echoing what you said. I also see it in the findings. We actually have in Germany the top 2 are working from home and flexible hours, and then followed by a bonus. So I think that's across the board something that that can be improved now, and people mostly just don't even want to just be home. They just want that flexibility, and that's what we've definitely seen, that people say, like you said, it can work, and I think it's kind of a sort of, they're growing closer together, the small companies, the medium-sized companies, the big companies, to see, okay, how can we use the technology to make it happen. And it's definitely a good development. Most people I talk to are pretty happy that this is one of the positive outcomes of the situation we got. But Elise, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, from a Nordics perspective, not surprisingly, the guide identified that 90% in the Nordics of the respondents already have flexible working options, which I think was the highest in Europe. So this is something that is already very much embedded in the culture, with kind of the famous Nordic work-life balance, and something that we've seen in the guide has steadily been increasing over the last few years. And I think that just proves that the new normal, per se, was already a thing in the Nordics within data analytics specifically. And I think it will be interesting to see how Nordic businesses facilitate for this even more moving forward, because it's such a big demand from candidates now when they're looking to make a change. Also in the form of maybe flexible working on top of working from home. So people will seek kind of flexibility around hours in addition to location. So definitely it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah. And I think if we look at the data, that was probably one of the biggest shifts pre and post COVID, which was pre-COVID. It was very much, I want to work from home, and then everybody did work from home. And now then it became a lot more about, okay, I want flexibility, I want to set my own hours and things like that. I've seen that a question has come in from Deepak. So it says, are gaming companies likely to gain from the COVID situation? So I don't know if Ewan, with the Spanish element, could be a good one for you.
It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. I think there's definitely gaming companies out there that have obviously done really well from it. People are on their phones more than ever in terms of screen time. So if that's sort of gaming, then yes. If we're talking about the gaming whereby we start to cross over to obviously betting and gambling, it's a little bit different, to be honest. They actually were hit pretty bad when live sport went down. I know they proactively tried to bring in new things that people could gamble on, but it's not quite the same for what they'd be looking for in terms of live sport. So they're obviously starting to bounce back now. A lot of clients are starting to look at those people that maybe they were looking for before COVID, and now are in a position whereby the money's coming in again, so they can start hiring. In terms of gaming companies that are on phones or computers, whatever that may be, I'd say they've been busier than ever, and they haven't really seen much of a slowdown in recruitment. If anything, they've actually been hiring a bit more.
Perfect. And we've got another question come in from Lingana and Paul as well, which was, what impact and obviously none of us are experts in this, but you can talk from kind of experiencing it, which is, do you think there's going to be an impact on Brexit from UK candidates wanting to work in the EU?
So yeah, let's preface by saying I'm definitely not an expert at Brexit. I think we've been talking about Brexit a lot over the last few years, of course, and I'm myself a French citizen in England. I'm impacted by what Brexit will bring about. I think the main answer is we don't really know yet. They're still discussing all the policies and everything that will really change in both sides, really, of the fence. My feeling is that we will have to get some sort of visa sponsorship or things like that. I would assume that the government will make things a bit easier than typically getting like a visa to go to the US, where it's quite lengthy and it's a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. I would assume they'll have some partnerships between countries traditionally that were in the EU, so England and other European Union, to make things smooth. But I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, that we really know what's going to happen with Brexit yet.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. But I think also one thing just to add as well is, as flexible working becomes more of a thing, hopefully this may be less of a concern for people, because I know companies are looking to hire remotely, and that's going to be a long-term model that they're going to focus on because they know it's possible now, and they know now that they can attract the best talent around the world, and they don't actually really mind where they're based. So hopefully people in the UK, who do want to experience new companies or do want to experience, obviously you want to experience the culture necessarily, but there's no reason why you can be based in the UK but actually work for a company in the EU in terms of a job perspective.
I would put an asterisk on that fact, though, because for tax residency, being based in a different country than the country you work in is going to bring about a lot of other issues. And I know it's impacting us at Harnum when we want to grow our teams of French recruiters. Post-Brexit, can we recruit someone that is based in France? We don't know yet. So to be seen, really.
Yeah, just on that side, I can also say I've heard both actually. So we do talk to a lot of people, regardless of their nationality, that are now in the UK that are talking to us about moving to Germany or to Europe for a role. And some of them said, I just got my visa and now I definitely want to stay. So I'm looking in the UK now. And the other half said, okay, I can't wait to go. So as soon as possible, maybe I can do a remote start and then move. So yeah, I think for all of us, it's too early to tell. We don't have the data collated to make a sort of educated statement on that. I just wanted to also go back to a funny fact on the benefits, because we also saw things that probably previously people thought this was never happening again, but the people who valued a car allowance as a benefit, for example, doubled from pre to post COVID, which is interesting because if you're in a large urban center like, I guess Stockholm or Berlin or London or Paris, you don't think about it, right? You take your bike, you walk, you take the subway. But now, even in those centers, people are kind of reluctant or for health reasons, they don't want to get into sort of this cramped space. So they actually think, okay, I got to go back to my own private space, so maybe a car to get to work, or some other solution. And in remote areas, that's probably even more pronounced. So I think that's interesting for candidates because they think, okay, I need this now, but also companies, when they put packages together and think about attraction, there's just some new things now that are not hard to to realize, that can make it really attractive to some people when that hits their need.
Yeah, I was going to say that could be a good thing.
I was just going to add in terms of flexible working as well, maybe people are also going to be looking at living further away. So people who live in the cities looking at the countryside, and it's obviously going to be important to have help to get to work. So car allowance would be obviously important then. So if they're now getting 3 days working from home a week, they'll be more likely to commute longer twice a week to have that work-life balance.
Definitely.
And I guess before we move on to the next one, I just want to remind anyone that's joined that this is a panel session, and we're joined to talk about the new European salary guide that we've just launched. For anyone that hasn't seen it, you can download that through the link in this post. We also have European, UK and US ones released. So before I move on to the next question, I've just seen a question come in from Diopam saying, has there been a slowdown on international hiring from outside the European Union lately because of the COVID-19 situation? Are employers now more reluctant towards visa sponsorship?
Yeah, I know, Elise, you have been dealing with that, so why don't you start on that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I'd say in the Nordics, there has been kind of an overall reluctancy to sponsor candidates. And the harsh reality of this is because the companies feel like they don't have to. They think that they can find the candidate within their location, and so that they don't have to spend money or time applying for the visa sponsorship for the candidates. So I'd say that it's pretty much the same in the Nordics.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually see a duality in the market right now. I just had a call with a client yesterday, and they specifically reminded me to please consider a European or even global applications and candidates, because their systems allow for that for certain roles, and they don't want to miss out on any talent because we're looking at 3 miles square around the company location. But then there are others that just for logistical reasons, they say, look, eventually we would really like for someone to join us here on site because they maybe have to do a lot of stakeholder relationship building, stuff like that. So if it's in 6 months, it's fine, but they would have to be here, and then we would have to sponsor them. And for that reason, because of time or maybe also the legal situation at the moment, we have to just put these on the back and focus on a local option. And so that, I think you can't answer that question with yes or no. It's more it depends on the company and where they stand in their sort of infrastructure and what the role requires.
Cool. So moving on to the topic of the actual guide, which is salaries. Obviously, you all speak about, salaries day in, day out with the markets. And I would love to kind of hear what your thoughts are on, the specific data that's come out, but also what trends you've seen within salaries within the different markets that we cover over the last year.
I can start on that one, just speaking from, in particular, Spain. It's really interesting to see that when someone in Spain was actually looking for a new role, the average salary rise they were looking for was 29%, which is actually very high. But what was actually achieved is 9%. So there's obviously a massive discrepancy there between candidate expectations and client expectations. And obviously that could be down to markets maturing, and benchmarking is slowly starting to come into these new startup companies that are a bit more established. But it also, people are still moving. So it also shows that people then are looking at, okay, salary isn't as good as I was hoping for, but let's look at all the reasons why that may be. And, it could come down to things like flexible working that is obviously offered less in Spain. So if one company isn't offering that and another is, then they can make savings there. It also seems that Spain's also very bonus driven. So companies seem to, the amount of people getting bonuses in Spain is going up. So maybe companies are using that more in terms of enhancing their package. So, not offering a higher salary straight away, but, being able to use the company's profits and performance to then reward their staff. Because it was actually quite a high average bonus as well. I think it was highest in Europe at 20%. So that's obviously something else that people can factor into their package long term. But then it's also, I suppose, quite refreshing for people that, they know they maybe can't get the money they're hoping for, so they can look at other things that could make them enjoy their job more or their work-life balance more. But it'll be interesting to see over the next year how that pans out in terms of, are people enjoying their jobs more or less people going to be looking, or is there something else that might come up that's lacking?
Yeah, I think I can kind of relate to a lot of the topics that you mentioned, Ewan. Within the Nordics, I'd say that we've typically seen an average salary increase of 10 to 15% when the candidate is changing their roles. But in this year, in the guide, we actually saw that the candidates were seeking an increase of 20%, but in reality only achieved 8%. So similar to your market, Ewan, that was a big difference. And the reason behind this is difficult to pinpoint because there are multiple factors. But I think in general, companies are now trying to offer perhaps a more comprehensive total package rather than just focusing on salary, which I think is beneficial to all parties, really. How's that in West?
Yeah, it would be the similar point I would have made about candidates looking to change jobs, wanting an increase of 21% in their salary, but in the reality of things, getting half of that at 10%. I think it's part of the game of recruitment in the first place, where you're going to ask for as much as you can get, and then you have the real number in your head that you're okay to go for. So I think that's one of the reasons. In terms of salaries, I think in France specifically, the salaries definitely didn't go down. I wouldn't say they've gone up terribly, I'll say that, over the last year. But I've definitely seen the emergence of some specific roles where the salaries have gone up higher than other roles. Thinking specifically of the DevOps engineers. Those are kind of roles that were not necessarily in light a few years ago, but now, because of the structures in place and the data teams that are well developed and just the needs that have emerged from that, DevOps are really gold to companies, and they're trying to attract them with money, one of the many benefits they can give. So I think the main increase I've noticed in France was in the DevOps engineers. So if you're looking to start a career and get a diploma, that might be the good diploma to get.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. Actually, starting with that point, I can definitely confirm that DevOps, especially cloud automation, those topics definitely have seen a rapid increase in demand in terms of the job itself, but also the salaries. I think in general we have sort of the same numbers in terms of what increase people are seeking and what they eventually achieve. It's a bit lower. It's around 21% they're seeking and 14 actually achieved. The bonus is actually an interesting thing because we have 17% of people. 17% is the average size of the bonus, which is actually kind of low, I would say, so between 10 to 20. And half of the people actually have a bonus as part of their compensation. Now, what's behind the data is interesting because if you would ask people which companies they want to join, those are usually the ones that actually don't have a bonus. So they do an all-in base salary. And they justify that by saying, look, you know, you have a good perspective. We are the company where you're going to learn tools and you know, processes and sort of development cycles that will help you in your career. So that's sort of the compensation, and that has actually, I think, stayed the same. So we've just seen slight increases across the board. Definitely, I would say what I mentioned in the beginning, the COVID shock to the economy and the sort of decrease in these AI and machine learning products, especially when it comes to very high paid, super specialized people that don't have a lot of relevance to the business model. Those roles have gone down, and the salaries for those roles have also gone down, because I think now, and that's actually a good thing of this whole situation, companies are just more eager when you talk to them to say, what's the value to our business of this role? What value will this person bring to us? And I think that goes back to Wes's point of DevOps, which is clearly in a more advanced development cycle when you deal with deployment and you need people to see reliable code and deployment speed. Then you need those people, and that makes them attractive now. So I think that's an overall point, that salaries for the engineering side, the DevOps side, the software engineering side are definitely rising, and the rest sort of is steadily increasing. And people also see that in the market.
Yeah, I think one thing also to add is, I think certainly since I've started recruitment, 5.5 years ago, there's more and more companies starting, you know, fintech startups day in, day out. And naturally they have less money. They have, you know, they can't throw money around like, you know, some of the bigger companies have. So they really need people to buy in to their product, their business, like Peter said, the development opportunities. So that will have an impact as more of these smaller companies come around. The salaries will drop. It's just part and parcel of that. But we're finding that that's also less of a motivator, because people want to start working for these cool companies, and they want to say that they work at a cool startup than, you know, maybe a big traditional company. Cool.
And I guess I've seen a question come here from a man, and it said, considering living expenses, you know, industry development, income tax, work-life balance, which is particularly relevant for you guys, which European country is best to move to in Europe for data scientists? So, you know, we can have a little bit of a pitch fest here.
Well, if you're a great talent, please come to France. I think over the last few years, with changes of government and things that came with it, there's been a great investment in innovation. I refer to that in the salary guides, mentioning there's a lot of financial incentives given to companies to innovate, to hire tech talents. So basically, you can hire a recent PhD grad and get their first 2 years paid for by the government, as well as more money for research and development purposes, all paid for by the government, as long as you're within innovation. So that's one thing. I would say the one barrier for entry in France is the language. Most companies are still very much attached to speaking French at work, but that is changing with a lot of startups that we currently work with within, for example, InsurTech and FinTech, that are very much open to hiring English-speaking candidates. So I would say pros and cons on that one. But you know, you can learn French. It's not an easy language, but I hear it's a beautiful language. So.
Yeah, I can maybe piggyback off that because the language here isn't really the big issue in Germany. There are some companies that were required because a lot of stakeholders just don't speak English. But for the most part, it's not an issue. But what you have to consider in Germany, The tax rates are pretty high. That's no doubt, because also the social systems and the services you get are a lot. So that obviously is a cost factor. Sort of a pro and con depending on your personal preference, what's important to you. But the thing that always people sort of miss is a little bit the regional differences in the country. So you do have a salary, and also I would almost say cost standard of living curve that goes from east to west and from north to south. So in the southwest, it is definitely, the cost of living is 20, 30, 40% higher than you would have in the north, or in Berlin especially. And Berlin is the most low-cost area. And that's also what companies, especially big companies, think about when they put their locations in the country. Yeah. So a lot of companies, of course, in Berlin are, they pay very well, and you won't notice a difference, and you will deal with a high salary and a low cost of living. You can also end up with the reverse situation, especially if you come from outside the EU. Going to Munich on a 50,000 euro salary, to make it very specific, for a DevOps engineer, that's not going to make you very happy over the long term. So that's always a thing to consider, is cost of living differences, and then make a decision on what's the perspective and what's the value, and where do you stand in your career when you make that choice. That's what I can say is definitely important.
Yeah, I mean, from a Nordic perspective, it's going to be like a battle of the countries here, but Nordics is obviously pretty renowned for their great work-life balance. It's just something that I mentioned earlier that's kind of embedded in the culture. So I already have loads of candidates requesting kind of positions in the Nordics. And I think in terms of tax, yeah, there's a lot of tax, but like Peter said, the social system is so good, so that's obviously the trade-off there. And then you have languages. I'd say, depending on the country, Stockholm is very forward-leaning in terms that they have a lot of business languages are in English. So you won't struggle as much there if you know English. I'd say the rest of the Nordic countries are probably lagging a little bit behind on that topic. You have Oslo, where you have a few companies who are able to hire English speakers, but the majority would require Norwegian language.
Yeah, I think it's hard to answer, because it obviously depends where you are at the minute and things like that. But I know certainly across the Spain and the Netherlands, probably cost of living is less than a lot of bigger, more well-known cities, but obviously the salaries are lower as well. So you really need to look into, what you think you're going to spend, look at rent, and really probably focus on the disposable income element of that, because when people move, they may take a little lower salary, and that, sometimes people are reluctant to do that. But if you actually look into it, then you may be better off. I think obviously the weather in Spain is nice, particularly in Barcelona. And the work-life balance seems good as well. But there's so many different factors that you would need to think about.
Yeah. And obviously, just to follow up on that, if you want to look at the specific salaries that we're talking about here, please do go ahead and download the guide. The link is in this post, and it's only been a couple of hours released, so you can check it out. We have a very specific question from Oscar that's come in for you, Peter. Are salaries higher in Munich than in Berlin?
Generally speaking, yes. Company adapt salaries to the cost. So because the cost is so different, yeah, the salaries will be different. But this is an on average statement, so don't hold me to account, please.
Okay. And we touched a little bit on it with the conversation that Wes brought up in relation to DevOps, but it's something that we touch on our guide as well, which is how tools emerge and how tools begin to dominate the market. Could you share your insights? And I do appreciate you're going to have different specialities here that you might want to touch on, about which tools you're seeing now that are in demand, and maybe touch on what tools you think candidates should start thinking about developing in as well.
Yeah, from a Nordic perspective, within data engineering, I typically see the kind of desirable tool stack, obviously consisting of SQL and Python, and then cloud solutions such as AWS or GCP. and then distributed systems such as Hadoop, as well as streaming technologies such as Kafka. I'd say Python is still the most popular programming language, but more businesses are asking for Scala as well. Within data science, it kind of depends because it's such a wide field. But for kind of the common tools that we see are obviously SQL again and Python or R. And then Spark and some machine learning skills. We also see data visualization tools such as ClickView or Power BI. But I think it's worth mentioning that in data science, we see more and more focus in the Nordics on soft skills, such as kind of business knowledge and having people been able to see the business benefits of the data, as well as the kind of ability to communicate these benefits to executives and other colleagues in other areas of the company. When it comes to advice to people who want to get into these industries, it kind of depends what your starting point is. But I'd say Python is definitely something that you should learn. I don't think I've had a single vacancy that aren't requesting Python. I don't know how that is in your markets, but that's definitely the case for the Nordics.
My understanding is Python in every market we deal with at Harnum is the most popular tool in terms of programming languages. And I think we might be on the same page as well with R and SAS. I guess diminishing in demand. They are more, I guess, traditionally looking at statistics and things like that. And now with data science and all the return on investment that we can get from that, we're looking at more advanced automation, machine learning, and things like that. And really, Python seems to be the one language that can do that more efficiently. I don't know if it's the same in Spain and in Germany. It is in Nordics, from what Elise said.
Yeah, I mean, from a credit risk perspective, there is still a lot of companies that do use SAS, just mainly down to for regulation reasons, particularly the bigger banks. I think there's definitely, though, more of a push towards Python, and it's been like that for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's definitely happening more. And also it puts more demand on the SQL skills as well, and actually being good at using SQL as a separate tool rather than with SAS. And I think that's been quite a big thing. So certainly using SQL day in, day out. And if you are in a SAS environment, that's fine. But if you can get some sort of, half a day, a week commercial exposure to Python through your work, doing could be just research or exploratory analytics, I think that will definitely help, because companies do find it hard to take someone, you may have the perfect background, but they do find it hard to take someone who's never coded in Python but use SAS to then go straight into a Python job. So yeah, I'd agree, Python's the main thing. There's still a lot of SAS, but it's definitely reducing, particularly in banking, which SAS used to be kind of every company used it.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I mean, I agree with all of what you guys said, and especially in data science, machine learning, the Python sort of, and R, and still SAS sort of dominance is definitely there. One thing I also noticed is when it comes to the cloud solutions, which is always a big topic for companies, they use it. They ask, cloud experience, you have the big three, and increasingly we actually get companies in the marketing and e-commerce field that we don't want to work with an Amazon solution or with Amazon Web Services. So please look at Google Cloud, and then others prefer, maybe because they're a Microsoft legacy system, they want to use Azure. So in the end, there's not really that one tool that will make you perfect for the market. I really love that Elise mentioned the statement, especially in data science, around soft skills, sort of this focus away from what the tool is, what exactly the brilliance of the technical solution is, which is a great achievement. But especially now with companies focusing on the business outcome and the value, the soft skill side, how do you sell the value of this algorithm and what it could potentially predict to the business? And what is that going to mean for us as a business? Those are questions that I get a lot in interviews at candidates. So also in terms of what can you do to be attractive, don't only focus on the tools, also see, okay, what is the relevance of this to a business and what solution does this provide? That's a thing that a lot of hiring managers always say is important to them. So apart from that, yeah, the tools are the same over here.
Yeah, and I think that one point you guys just mentioned, in relation to the soft skills as well, could be quite helpful in the question that's coming from June, I think, which is, what advice would you give any graduates looking to find a job in data analytics? I know Wes seems particularly interested in the graduate field, so I'll see if he can answer this one.
Well, I think it's a great follow-up question to the one we just talked about, where we highlighted soft skills as being something that is quite important and looked after. And technical skills. I think when you're a grad or about to graduate, the two things you need to try and develop are those two aspects, the tech and soft skills. So on the soft skills side of things, I would definitely advise speak to recruiters like us, practice interviewing, think about the business reason of what you would do, because at the end of the day, coding something is great, but what is it for? And that's what will make you stand out. And on the tech side of things, I guess listen to podcasts or chats like we are having right now about what is trending, what is in demand in terms of tools. And I would strongly recommend when you do your internships or personal projects, if you have a GitHub or you'll go on Kaggle, try and use those specific tools. So we mentioned Python, Scala, Spark. If you can have an internship where you use those three languages, platforms, frameworks, whatever, that's going to make you stand out and you stand a chance to get that job compared to someone else that might be also great diploma, but hasn't used those tools in industrial environments.
Yeah, definitely. I think, commercial experience in any world, I guess is really important. Even if you're, even if you've kind of just starting out, any exposure you can get is fantastic. Just a reminder, we are live, so any other questions, please do feel free to ask them. If you download the guide and read through it and have anything, we should be live for the next maybe 15 minutes, so you will have time to run through anything else. So just so everyone is aware, we do release a separate guide on diversity, which is going to come out later in the year. But some of the data that was produced in this salary guide does touch on, I guess, at least the gender side of diversity, and particularly an important one within the tech space. There is some really important, interesting points that have come up in this salary guide. I don't know if you guys could start sharing your thoughts on what you've seen that's happened this year from a gender diversity perspective, and what you predict may kind of change in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, you're looking at particularly Spain. Unfortunately, Spain dropped down this year. I think it was the only one to drop down a couple of percent, which is obviously disappointing. But companies are starting to make more of an effort around this, and we're certainly seeing from our side that, especially at the more junior and graduate levels, there's a lot more diversity coming through in terms of applications. I think in some countries it's just going to take a little bit more time for people to get experience and for that to take into effect, because obviously a lot of what's being studied now maybe wasn't necessarily as popular a few years ago. So whilst it's still maybe not where we want it to be right now, it looks like it's going to improve, and hopefully across Spain, Netherlands, and the Nordics, that'll continue to go up.
Yeah, I think as we saw in the Nordics, that the female data professionals have stayed approximately the same for the last few years, like I've seen anyway, and that's around 20%. I think there's a lot of reasons behind this, but most importantly, I think it kind of stems from the lack of early exposure to these subjects, and I think that early exposure to the STEM subjects and computer-related skills as well in school is going to kind of help close that tech gender gap. So hopefully in the future we'll see closer to 50-50, but we'll see. Hopefully.
Yeah, as a whole, I think the stats for Europe is 23% of females are in those jobs that we do. So it's still not even a quarter. I think one great thing that came out of the stats for France Benelux is the number of female professionals grew from 19% last year to 26% this year. And it's actually now the highest percentage across Europe. So a very positive signs. And it is a bit reflected by, I guess, the encouragement we get from some of our partners and clients telling us, please do send us a diverse shortlist of candidates. And sometimes even saying only send us, it's not very ethical, but we have to send a very diverse shortlist. But female are definitely looked after much more than they may have been before. And it's a topic of conversation to make sure that we have a diverse workforce. So I think it's also a trending topic.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's an interesting question because we see the number for Germany. I think it's the same, and it's the lowest in Europe, 19%, so roughly a fifth is female. We've actually done a number of events in Berlin around this topic of diversity in data, which were very interesting and had a very diverse crowd and interaction on. Actually, we did it live. It was when you could still meet other humans face to face. Quite an interesting experience. You guys remember? So, I mean, what came out of that is what Wes just mentioned is that most companies, hiring managers, everyone's open and interested, not only on the gender side. I mean, we're also talking about ethnic diversity and any other kind of diversity, to just bring more opinions and mentalities and sort of understandings of how to do things into a company. For the most part, it's just also a struggle to find those people because, especially in the technical side, as Elise mentioned, you just have a huge, overwhelming number of males, not necessarily white males, but males in general in that sort of dimension, who are active in the field. So we actually see, at least in Germany, there's a lot of stuff being done also on this in the schools and the universities to say, okay, just open that up a little more. And I think actually one of the other maybe positive outcomes of this situation is the world has sort of grown together a little bit more because there's also stuff on YouTube and you see videos, you see people presenting their work, and more people than just the 5 in your team can see it. And that should also help to just open the space up a little more, because in Germany we definitely suffer also in other fields of engineering, not data engineering, but also other fields, very male dominated, because just a lot of technical work is being done here, and that usually attracts then those profiles. So I think with this development, that should definitely improve, but it's still early days.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, we are releasing a more in-depth guide that produces more in-depth data on the diversity side of things that's coming out later this year. So be interesting to delve into a bit more of that. But it's a really interesting kind of starting point. I've seen a question come in. Hopefully we can go through it, which is, what segments of businesses are currently hiring right now and are continuing to do well amidst the pandemic?
A lot of companies are still doing really well, to be honest. A lot of online companies and retailers. So, online shopping is super popular now for obvious reasons. I know I've been having a lot more Amazon parcels or closed parcels than probably normally have had before. And a lot of companies as well, like startups, investors are still believing in what they're doing, and they've, funding is still being closed and they're still going to go through it. So, find a lot of startups and fintechs are still looking for the talent. And to be honest, it's probably one of the best times to look because there's people on the market, there's less companies hiring, and it really could get you, potentially someone that you might have struggled to get in the past.
To maybe answer to that question about segments, what I've noticed in France is a couple of our segments, traditionally successful segments, which were marketing analytics, insight analytics, and digital. So all the web analysts, digital analysts, has taken the biggest hits. And we haven't seen much demand, and all our projects that we had and searches were put on hold during that period. They're slowly starting to get back on. What we've seen no stop in were data science, data engineering, the more, I guess, deep tech positions they carried on recruiting. But the more, I guess, on top of the infrastructure roles were the one that took a hit. So anything related to digital and marketing, we've seen a big hit in France.
Interesting. And I guess that, leads now to the next question, which is, I've seen it's related to data science, which is from Alban. He said, is there any decline in the USP of traditional data scientists due to lack of domain knowledge or automated machine learning and so many cheap online data courses?
Yeah, I can take that one. I would definitely say it depends. You're looking for a more specific answer. I mean, generally speaking, I would say no. Just because there's a Kaggle champion out there, that doesn't take away the understanding of maybe embedding a deep learning algorithm into an infrastructure. That's something that will always be in demand, and few people can do it and like to do it. The question, I think, is more about the application. So what I mentioned before, that in terms of the business model, we talked a little bit about the value of data science and machine learning solutions to a business instead of just being experimental or research driven in terms of technical capability. So if you look at the company and you do talk to the company, it would definitely be good to just find out what are they looking for. Do they really need someone to maybe just deploy a machine learning model and really sort of do the mechanics and execute? Then yes, probably the answer would be a traditional data scientist in the terms of a PhD, highly qualified person that is into the model would probably not be as interesting to the company as someone that can just execute. But on the other side, if it's a company that says we look at this as an integral part of our business and we want to use an algorithm to really further our business and optimize the model and really use it as a pillar, then that will require a fully fledged end-to-end data scientist. So I guess I hope that answers the question. It just depends on the application scenario.
Yeah, I think data science is one of those things it's transformed so quickly in the industry that you see such a quick shift of what a data scientist is. And I know that's been a topic of conversation within Harnum for a couple of years. We've created teams and changed teams as it's changed out as well. So we're just coming up to the hour. So I just want to thank everybody for obviously joining. Just a reminder, if you want to look at the data in more depth, please do pop onto the link in this post and you'll be able to go and download the European Salary Guide and the UK Salary Guide for those of you in the UK. We are launching our US Salary Guide next Tuesday. So if any of you are interested in the trends that have come out within the US, please join us on next Tuesday's live. And it goes without saying that if you have any questions or if you want to talk to us about getting hired or hiring, you can always reach out. And if you're in any of the countries here, you can reach out to one of these wonderful people. But thank you so much for being part of today's live. And we'll see you next Tuesday.